Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to bring you my top 10 dark fiction books that were published in 2022. Now, this is the last book in my Best of the Year series, and of course, if you missed anything, definitely go check out the description box for more links. But as much as I'm excited to bring you one last video, I'll be honest, I'm also excited to be done, because I've been filming these videos for weeks and weeks, and as much as this girl loves a good top 10 list, I also enjoy moving on and talking about new releases again. So hopefully you will enjoy this as well, hopefully get some new recommendations and some books for you to check out next year and so forth. All that being said, let's get into the books. Now first, at number 10, we have Anybody Home by Michael Sedlinger, and this is a book that follows a family that has a home invasion happen to them. This book draws from the author's own experience as they themselves had experienced a home invasion and decided to write that into a fictionalized story. This book has a very unique narrative style that will work better for some readers than others, but it definitely doesn't have the very classic narrative you would expect from a thriller. Instead, it's a really unique idea where the story is almost told from an outside perspective, and it's almost treated as if it is a narration or a play or something that's happening. So we are almost watching the screenplay of this all taking place, and so it has this really unique framework to it, and the story itself is told from the perspective of the home invaders, and they're basically putting on this production. The idea behind this is brilliant. It's also absolutely terrifying, especially knowing the fact that it draws from real life experience. And this book definitely gets dark and disturbing. This is the kind of book that you need to know what you're getting yourself into. You need to be okay with pretty much all the content warnings. This book messed me up. It was definitely dark. It's very unique, and that is something, as I've said many times over this past year, is something that I seek out when it comes to horror fiction. Is I've read a lot of the genre and now I'm really looking for something new. And if you're in the same boat, this is definitely one that you'll want to check out, assuming you can handle how dark it gets, because man does it get dark. Then at number 9, we have Woman Eating by Claire Conda, and this is a piece of literary horror fiction that follows a woman who you find out is a vampire. And so within the story, we follow her through her daily life, and through her life, she is constantly starving because she craves the experience of eating human food, but of course she cannot eat it and really is not satisfied alone on blood. And so this is a story that is very character focused. The plot, I'll admit, is a little bit thin. It's really much more focused around this woman, and what I love so much about this story specifically is the fact that while it's a vampire story, really it's a take or a different look at eating disorders, and that definitely speaks near to my heart. I really love to see how she is so mentally hungry throughout the book. You get to see her just craving that experience and watching other people consume food, constantly thinking about it but not being able to eat it, and I just thought that that experience was really authentic how it was told. Again, I'm someone who doesn't always love vampire fiction, so I enjoy a story like this that is technically vampire fiction but takes a different angle to it, and is less about the like blood-sucking monsters and more kind of explores a different angle around that. So I thought this one was very nuanced, again very different, and definitely one that left me thinking about it long after I was done. Then at number 8, we have When the Corn is Waist High by Jeremy Scott, and this is a really unique book to put on this list because this reads like a cozy mystery. It's technically a serial killer thriller. We follow a small town where there is a sheriff who is also the priest of the town, and he is investigating a murder that takes place, and then soon enough there is another murder, and they bring in the outside FBI and cops to find out what is going on because it appears to be a serial killer on the loose. Now, this is perhaps the coziest serial killer story I've ever read. It's very adorable. It spends a lot of time talking about small towns, religious customs, things like that, and it definitely has, I believe, a southern US feel to it that I admit I don't necessarily know that as a Canadian reviewer, but you can see those threads in there. So if you love small town US life, I think this is something that will definitely appeal to you. And if you follow my channel for a while, you know that I have a love for the dark and disturbing, and so I don't really read a lot of cozy mysteries, so this should not have been up my alley. But I will say this is a book you have to read all the way through because there's more going on with the book, and perhaps you'll see parts of it coming, but I had so much fun on the ride. I didn't quite know what this book was going to be until it got there, and I just had a blast. So do not stop this book halfway. Do not DNF it. You gotta finish the ride if you're gonna start it. And I had such a blast with this book. I just found it to be so much fun and just the kind of book that put a smile on my face. And again, I don't love cozy mystery stories, but this one was just so out of the box, so funny, and I really loved it. So, you know, occasionally the right one will hit the right mark, and yeah, this one definitely did. Then at number 7, we have Full Immersion by Gemma Moore, and this is a piece of sci-fi horror that follows a woman who is suffering from postpartum depression after giving birth to a child. And so she decides to deal with this by taking this really adventurous VR therapy, and the story kind of goes from there. She tries to work through her past and struggles. And I really like this book for so many reasons. First off, the fact that the author brings himself into the story. They also have suffered from postpartum depression. I appreciate them really opening themselves up to that and really telling their story within this fictionalized world. And also the fact that because of that, this book has such emotional depth. It feels raw and gritty, and I really love that. I felt it was a very authentic experience from what I can see. And also what I liked is that it referenced different literature and media that I really love. This book definitely has an Ian Reid feel, which I found it from the author is something she was intentionally trying to do. As well, this book definitely feels reminiscent of one of my favorite movies of all time, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, the one with Jim Carrey. Apparently that was also an inspiration, so I felt really smart as a reviewer for actually picking up on that within the story. So if you love those as well, I definitely recommend this one. It is, again, rough and raw and uncomfortable and different and unique. And again, it brings together one of my other favorite genres, which is, of course, is science fiction. And I love that blend within horror. It's something that I think a lot of us are looking for more often than not. And it's so pleasing to find a science fiction horror book that actually works and actually delivers what we're asking for. And then at number 6, we have Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White. This is actually a piece of young adult horror, which is not something I read and enjoy too often. So the fact that one of these books made my list really speaks to its all ages appeal. This book follows a trans person who is running away from a religious cult. They end up coming to work and live with a group of queer teenagers that protect them. And what I like is that this book is set within a post-apocalyptic world, and there are creatures that emerge, and the story just has so many layers to it. Honestly, my favorite aspect to the story is the fact that it has some really raw and rings true representation of a religious cult, and just the way that religion really takes over in these pandemic times, and you really get to see those influences within the story. So I thought it was really on point. It really hit home for me. And of course, I always love some great queer representation built organically into a really good story. This book does have some queer romance in it, and while I don't normally love romance within a book, I ended up kind of shipping the couple anyway and enjoying along for the ride. It also has a little bit of autism representation, so many things that I love in here. And again, at the core of this story is this gritty story with some dark, creepy monsters. It gets violent and gross and terrifying, and it really kind of was one of these books that kind of had it all. And again, often I will judge a book for being in the young adult category, and this is one of those books that proves me again and again that I need to always keep myself open to different age groups, open to different categories, and you never know what's going to surprise you. And this one, yes, was fantastic. And then at number 5, we have The Stars Did Wander Darkly by Colin Meloy. And this is a piece of supposedly middle grade horror, but I'm going to argue that it actually should be referenced as adult coming of age narrative. So this is a horror story that follows a group of young people who are living in a town where the adults of this town are unburying or excavating this site. And in doing so, they appear to be unleashing some sort of ancient entity that supposedly has been in the town before. And they, of course, unleashed it on the town once again. And so as we follow along in the story, you see that the adults seem to be changed, possibly being taken over or possessed by this entity, and the children are left to their own devices to try to save the day. This book definitely hits on a lot of the classic tropes of the horror genre, but I think it does it really well. I thought it was really enjoyable. I happen to love the nostalgia that comes with it, and the reason that I want to call this book a more of an adult story rather than middle grade is that it makes a lot of great references to horror movies and other movies that I love that will honestly go over the head of a young person because they're referencing, again, a lot of older things that they probably haven't watched. And so I really enjoyed this one. Again, I don't think it's like reinventing the genre, but when a book does the genre really well, I definitely appreciate it, and this one was such a joy to read. I basically read it twice. Then at number 4, we have Fairy Tale by Stephen King, which I think is going to be on everyone's best of the year list, but perhaps is a little bit of a surprise it's on mine because I've been known to have a hit or miss relationship with Stephen King. But this, of course, is his brand new iconic coming of age story that follows a boy who looks after an old man and his dog, and the story goes from there into a bit of a fantasy twist. I love the fact that it plays around with the themes of fairy tales. I thought it was very smart and really leaned into what Stephen King does best, and that is coming of age narratives with really complex, well-developed characters. I love the first part of this book, and if the second half had been as strong, this honestly could have been in the #1 spot because I was pretty intensely in love with the relationship of this young boy and his friendship with this older man and the dog in the mix. It hit me in all the nostalgic feels. I also love the fact that this book is actually set very modern and really references a lot of different events and doesn't kind of force the reader to kind of always focus on looking back in the past, but actually appreciate the present. I feel like it's the kind of book that, yes, it's a new release, but I already want to call it a classic because I really do think it's going to have some long-lasting appeal. Yes, the second half could have been edited down for my preference, but I say that about every single Stephen King book, so I gotta give this one a pass. I really enjoyed it, and I do recommend it. If you're one of the few people that didn't read it last year, you probably should change that. Next, at #3, we have No Gods for Drowning by Hailey Piper, which is a thriller noir fantasy story that follows a few different perspectives, one of them being a detective who is tracking down a serial killer who is on the loose, and they are forming these kind of murders that appear to have an occult or cult-like angle to them. And then we also follow the perspective of the serial killer themselves, who turns out to be much more complex and morally gray than you might expect. This is a book that definitely has a fantasy element to it, so technically I could have been a stickler and put it in my fantasy top 10, and it would have lived perfectly fine there because I do think you need to be okay with some SFF in your work if you're going to enjoy this one. But I'll be honest, I've already filmed that video, so it's going here, and it still deserves a spot because it is dark and twisted, has a tiny bit of cosmic horror, which is something that Hailey Piper likes to do, but I also think that it's a little bit more mainstream than some of her previous work, so if you've been intimidated by some of her previous works, as I have been, I think this is a very good place to start. An excellent story. It's full of action, excitement, a bit of queer, complicated relationships, so it's not the perfect romance that you're looking for, but I really like the fact that the characters are just, again, morally gray, and you start to sympathize perhaps with who should be the villain of the story because maybe they're not such a villain. And I just really loved it a lot. Again, it's one that I definitely plan to reread. It's one I'm going to be thinking about for a long time, and I highly recommend it. I hope you check it out. And then at #2, we have Liminal Zone by Junji Ito. And if you're a longtime watcher of my channel, you shouldn't be surprised that Junji Ito made the list. I love this horror manga short story collection. And so within the story collection, we have one involving weeping women, we have another involving a serial killer, and those are both really well done. But the story that earned it a spot on this list is the one involving the Catholic boarding school and the creepy priest and wife that are taking care of them. And this book just leans into all of the religious horror elements that I love so much. It's absolutely disturbing. It has some amazing imagery, as you would always expect from Junji Ito, and I just found it to be just layered and hit me in some really personal ways, and I loved it so much. It's one that I was just on fire when I read it. I just wanted to like yell about it on the rooftops, so this is my version of that. So highly recommend it. I do think it's a fantastic place to start with his work because, again, it's only 4 stories, very easy to get into and very representative of the brilliance of his mind. And finally, at the #1 spot, we have String Follow by Simon Jacobs, and this is a horror book that I feel like is a bit underhyped, and I can see why, just because it's such a unique story and it definitely has a certain kind of reader that is going to be attracted to it. Basically, readers like myself enjoy really weird, messed up books. This story is set within a small town where we follow a group of teenagers, but despite that, this definitely is an adult fiction read. And within this town, you find out that there is some sort of entity that is hovering over it and trying to influence the youth of the town, specifically to get to one pure girl. And so within the story, we follow them as they are doing all the terrible things that teenagers do. So all the content warnings for cutting, for suicidal thoughts, for pornography, just insert terrible things that teenagers do or could do, and it happens within this book, as well as gun violence, etc. It's a rough book, but at the same time, I thought it was so interesting and so smart. And I think what I enjoyed most about it is that it's a book that kind of meanders, but I mean that in a really good way, where you're reading the book and you're trying to figure out what is going to happen next, where is it going, what's the point of this book, and it just keeps going and going and getting more twisted, and several times I thought I just knew where it was going to go, and it went somewhere else. This book I think I've read now 3 times before filming this video, and I keep finding more in this book. I keep peeling back layers of it is just very complex. I don't think it's a perfect book. I do think that it has some perhaps pacing issues towards the later half, but it's as close to perfect as I'm gonna get for a new release for horror. This is the book that I kept thinking about all year long. I kept coming back to again and rereading, and I really love it. Not for everyone, but if you share my taste in that particular slice of horror that is just really uncomfortable, if you like being disturbed by your books and like a book that is very character focused, this is one that you really have to check out. It's so smart, it's so unique, and I loved it so much. So that's it for this video. I'd love to know of the books I talked about, which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? I'd also love to hear what was your favorite horror book that you read last year that was published in 2022. And if you haven't yet, definitely go back and check out my other videos for my best of the year content, because like I said, it did take a while to film, edit, and put this all out, and I would definitely love to see some good feedback so that I know it's worth doing all again next year. In the meantime, if you're new to my channel and want to subscribe, I really appreciate it. You can also help me out by giving me a thumbs up, sharing this around online, dropping a comment, even if it's just an emoji like a ghost or a vampire, that all works. And if you want to hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.